I went on a business trip for the company and found my wife at the hotel with her boss. That scene broke my heart and I wondered why she was at the hotel with my boss. But then I decided to investigate and discovered a shocking fact that made me want a divorce immediately. They were desperate when I made the announcement, and soon she realized that she had made the worst choice. There was no shouting. No violent reaction. No punching the wall. Just silence. A silence that chilled my body. My feet froze at the entrance to the suite, and even with the muffled sound of the television on, my world screamed inside. There, in front of me, my wife, the woman who shared a decade of life with me, of plans, promises, beds and unborn children, was lying on the white sheet, her bare back partially covered by the crumpled sheet, and next to her, the man who for years had greeted me with pats on the shoulder and formal smiles. The man who promoted me, said to me phrases like, "You are trustworthy," and "The company needs people like you." The man who was naked in the hotel bed, with my wife, and with a slight smile of satisfaction on his face as he slept. I don't remember exactly how long I stood there, still. I don't remember if I cried, if I breathed, or if I even blinked. I only remember the nausea. The involuntary tremor in my hands. The sudden desire to vomit or disappear. I remember the insane urge to make a scene, to pull them by the hair, to scream with all the strength of all the years I dedicated to that relationship. But I did nothing. I closed the door as lightly as I had opened it. I left. I went down the hotel stairs like a zombie and got into the car with the certainty that there was something much more rotten behind this. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was something bigger. Dirtier. More devastating. Over the next few weeks, my mind spun like a machine that was out of control. Every memory from the last few months became a piece of a macabre puzzle. Her coldness. Her excuses to avoid intimacy. The cancelled dinners. The texts she never responded to. The long showers. Her new perfume. The new underwear I never saw her wear with me. And the cruelest of all, the distant looks, as if she had been silently saying goodbye to me for a long time. The sickest thing of all was that, lately, she had started touching me again. She had started having sex with me, giving me long kisses like she had in the beginning, looking into my eyes. I thought we were reconnecting. I thought she was finally choosing me again. And it was true. But not for the reason I imagined. It was guilt. It was fear. It was a miserable attempt to keep me blind. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I went through accounts, traced cards, requested images from the hotel's security cameras, made copies of old conversations from her cell phone, recovered deleted emails. And that's when I discovered something even more brutal than the betrayal itself. She had been planning that meeting for months. It wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't a sudden passion. It was something cold. Calculated. Meticulous. The hotel wasn't a coincidence. It was the same one where we had celebrated our 5th anniversary together. She chose that place on purpose. To humiliate, maybe. To provoke, I don't know. But there were too many details. In the email, she told him, "We're going to the same place he took me on our anniversary. I want to see how different it is with someone who knows what to do." That sentence echoed in my mind like a drum, beating non-stop. And then, as if the universe wanted to push me to the bottom of the well, came the final revelation. She wasn't in love. Not at all. She didn't want to leave him for me. She wasn't even looking for love. She just wanted to feel desired. Beautiful. Alive. In one of the audios, she said to a friend, "I need to feel like a woman again. You know, to be looked at, to be eaten as if it were the last. With my husband I only feel like I'm an extension of the house, of the routine. With the boss, I feel desired. He looks at me as if I were a prize. I need that. Even if it's just for a while." Those words tore me apart more than any image could. I stopped being a man. I became invisible. I became a piece of furniture. A provider of security, of shelter, of routine. I was erased. The worst part? It was realizing that even after the betrayal was discovered, even after seeing my pain, my silence, my distance, she tried to win me back. Not out of love. But out of fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of losing the comfortable life I gave her. Fear of discovering that outside of that adultery, she was just an ordinary woman, who was not desired by anyone other than a man married to another woman. And that's exactly what happened. When I announced the divorce, she went into despair. She cried, got on her knees, begged me. She said things like, I don't know what came over me, it was a moment of madness, I love you, forgive me. But it was too late. My heart, the one she crushed with the expensive heels she bought with my card, was now empty. I had nothing left for her. Nothing. Her words echo to this day, I just wanted to feel desired. I didn't want to lose you. And I, looking into her eyes, replied, you didn't lose me now. You lost me the day you chose to sleep with another man in that hotel. The rest was just the echo of your own downfall. The boss? Oh, he fell too. But not in the way you imagine. He wasn't fired, nor arrested, nor humiliated. He simply lost everyone's respect. Including hers. Because, just as she discarded me to feel desired, he discarded her when he saw that she was nothing more than another woman willing to cheat. They betrayed each other. And they were alone. One looking at the other like two lost souls who were never enough for anyone. She tried to come back, of course. She tried to look for me months later. She said that now she knew what she wanted. That I was the man of her life. That no one had ever treated her the way I did. That only now she saw how different I was. That only now she missed peace. But I was no longer the same. I had started over. I had learned that self-love is silent, but when it awakens, it burns away everything that is no longer useful. Today, she lives alone. Her boss married another woman, younger, prettier, more obedient. And she, who thought she could choose the terms of the betrayal, was discarded like a worn-out piece on a game board she never knew how to play. Me. I finally understood that you can't convince anyone to love you. Love is not asked for, begged for, or begged for. Love is given. And if the other person doesn't value it, let them lose it. Because time shows. Time demands it. And time doesn't forgive. But the most surprising part is yet to come. Because the real shock wasn't seeing her in bed with someone else. The real shock was finding out what she was doing while I was away. What she was saying about me to people. How she explained the marriage we had. And most of all, what she planned to do the day she found me back home. Because when I came back from the hotel and thought I had seen it all, I still had no idea what awaited me the next morning. A cold plan. A calculated move. A gesture from her that forever changed everything I thought about what it means to love someone. And that last revelation was what sealed my fate, hers and everyone around her. Do you want to know what she did, after all? What is a woman desperate to feel alive capable of doing against her own husband? The answer is in the story you are about to hear. Welcome to the channel. Here, we make one thing clear from the beginning: we do not support, encourage or romanticize cheating. Never. The stories you will hear are fictional, but based on realities that destroy lives every day. The goal is to show, without filters, how much a wrong choice can cause pain, regret and irreversible losses. Now, get ready, because what comes next is shocking, intense and impossible to forget. Good story. They met on a muggy September afternoon, in the middle of one of those corporate fairs packed with colorful booths, artificial scents, and manufactured smiles. But her smile didn't seem like part of a theater. There was a natural tenderness in her gestures, a calm way of speaking that immediately cut through the noise around her. Her name was Laura, an advertising executive with a soft expression, with the slightly sad eyes of someone who already knew what the world could take from someone. His name was Daniel, a logistics manager for a medium-sized company, practical, disciplined, with a sense of responsibility that sometimes went beyond what is healthy. The two talked about trivialities for exactly 17 minutes, but it was enough. It was enough for their eyes to recognize each other even without any shared history. It was as if, for some reason that neither of them could explain at the time, they were just waiting to meet. Their relationship began soon after, discreetly. Neither of them was fond of exaggeration or public declarations. They built an intimacy that seemed solid not because of grand gestures, but because of small daily loyalties: coffee ready in the morning, hands clasped in silence at the movies, late afternoon walks on Sundays. Daniel, accustomed to the rigidity of numbers, found in her a respite, a pause in what he called the marathon of adult life. Laura, in turn, felt protected in this man who always did what he said, who was not afraid of commitments, who looked her in the eye as if to say, "I am here." It was the kind of relationship that inspired confidence in friends, and perhaps even a certain envy in some acquaintances. To outsiders, they seemed the picture of balance. And perhaps, for a time, they really were. The wedding took place after 3 years together. Simple, beautiful, full of details thought out by the two of them. They chose not to have a big party, but invested in a light ceremony, outdoors, surrounded only by close friends. It was the kind of celebration that said more than 1,000 speeches. Laura, at the altar, had tears in her eyes. Daniel, in a dark suit and a freshly shaved beard, seemed to finally be taking a deep breath for the first time in days. It was a union that began with simple promises, and perhaps that was why they seemed unshakable. The routine that followed was not very different from that of most urban couples. Work, schedules, traffic, occasional dinners, half-finished series, bills to pay and few truly spontaneous moments. But even on the most tiring days, Daniel maintained the habit of asking if she was okay. And Laura, even exhausted, made a point of always going to bed with a kiss. There was respect. There was care. There was no overwhelming passion every day, but there was presence, and that, in their view, was enough. The years went by with small milestones: the purchase of an apartment in the 2nd year, the adoption of a dog in the 3rd, a remarkable trip to Europe in the 5th. They didn't have children, by mutual choice. Laura said she wanted to grow professionally before thinking about motherhood, and Daniel respected this, even if, silently, he sometimes missed imagining a little one running around the room. But he never demanded it, and that said a lot about him. Inside the house, there was harmony. Nothing explosive, but also no absence. The division of tasks was fair, sex was constant yet predictable, Friday dinners were almost a ritual. To the outside world, the relationship remained intact. The two still held hands in the street, still took pictures smiling at family birthdays. And when someone commented, "You two look so good together," they both nodded with the kind of smile that seemed to confirm that love, when mature, settles into a safe comfort zone. But inside, slowly, Laura's world was beginning to change. It was almost imperceptible at first. A vague discomfort she couldn't name. A restlessness that arose when the silence in the house went on for too long. A boredom disguised as peace. She began to miss something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Daniel's touch no longer sent shivers down her spine, and although she still loved him, she felt he had become too predictable, too present, too stable. A part of her wanted to be surprised again. Not by flowers or expensive dinners, but by something that would make her feel alive. At the same time, Daniel was going through an intense phase at work. He had been promoted to a regional coordination position, which required frequent travel and long hours. He tried to balance everything, but the truth is that he started coming home too tired to notice that Laura was changing. When he saw her looking down, he offered practical help. When she said she was bored, she suggested watching a movie together. He thought that being physically present was enough. It wasn't. But she didn't say that either. Because Laura had learned, from an early age, that some frustrations are too small to be explained without seeming selfish. The two began to work like a precise but automatic machine. They lived together, but they hadn't had a deep connection for a long time. Work-related conversations dominated dinners, nights ended with cold, sleepy kisses, and weekends became more about commitments than connection. There was still affection, but there was no soul. Laura tried to distract herself with courses, projects, new books. Daniel immersed himself in reports, goals, and video conference meetings. And so, day after day, the relationship began to fade into routine. Despite this, they never fought. There was no shouting, no open betrayal, no contempt. But perhaps that was precisely the problem. They were too comfortable in their own harmony. Daniel continued to be kind. He continued to keep his promises. He continued to bring coffee in bed on Laura's birthdays. But he had lost the sensitivity to realize that love does not die with a shout. It dies when it stops being seen. And Laura, in turn, felt guilty for this lack of feeling. Guilty for not knowing how to explain why, even with everything going well, she felt empty. It was in this scenario that she began to question her own identity. Who was she besides Daniel's wife? What was left of her besides their routine together? She began to avoid Friday dinners. She said she needed time for herself. She started painting again. She reconnected with old contacts, recalled memories of when she was single and felt vibrant. Daniel, although he noticed that she was more distant, did not pressure her. He thought it was a phase. That she needed space. And he gave it to her. With the best of intentions, but with the worst of consequences. Then an important business trip came up. Daniel needed to be away for 4 days, a strategic meeting with international partners. He was hesitant to accept at first. Laura seemed tired, different. But she encouraged him. She said she needed to be alone for a while, that it would be good for both of them. Daniel accepted, even though his heart felt a little heavy. He got everything in order, planned a dinner for the return trip, and sent a message before boarding. He didn't know that this would be the beginning of something that would change everything. Laura, in turn, used that time alone as a test. She wanted to understand what she felt when he wasn't around. If she missed him. If she felt relief. If she felt anything. It was a silent weekend. She painted pictures that she hadn't finished in months. She walked around the city like she hadn't done in a long time. She went to bed late, woke up late. And at times, she thought about him. She remembered the trips, the hugs, Daniel's calm laughter. But at other times, she felt something darker, freedom. And she didn't know if this was a sign that there was still salvation, or if everything had already silently broken. On the other hand, Daniel worked tirelessly. He didn't go out with his colleagues, he didn't enjoy the city. He spent his nights looking at photos with Laura on his cell phone, wondering what she was doing, if she was missing him. He thought about how he could rekindle the flame. Maybe a trip just the two of them. A weekend without a routine. A surprise of some sort. He sincerely believed that love needed maintenance. He just didn't know that sometimes love doesn't break for lack of effort, but for excessive emotional absence, even if involuntary. At the end of the trip, he decided to surprise her. He didn't tell her he would be back a day early. He bought her flowers. He chose the restaurant where they had met. He wrote her a handwritten letter. It was his way of saying, "I'm still here." It was his final gesture to try to start over. But he had no idea that this innocent gesture would lead him to the most devastating moment of his life. And at that moment, as the elevator slowly ascended to the 14th floor of the hotel, with his heart racing and his eyes shining with anticipation, Daniel still believed that their love could be saved. He still believed that she was home, missing him. I didn't yet know that when I opened that door, I wouldn't find the woman he loved, but the raw truth about how far the loneliness of someone who one day stopped being seen goes. Laura hadn't planned anything, at least that's what she kept telling herself as she chose the wine-colored dress that highlighted her fair skin and slender shoulders. She had always been a woman who made conscious, thoughtful decisions, and nothing in her life happened on impulse. However, that afternoon when Daniel got on the plane, an unexpected invitation came like a flash. Not a direct invitation, but an untimely compliment, a look that lingered longer than necessary, coming precisely from someone who, until then, had only represented a professional connection. He was confident, articulate, with a firm voice and always clear in his words. Laura noticed something in him that she hadn't felt in a long time, the feeling of being watched carefully, of having her presence acknowledged, even if it was hidden behind a carefully crafted formality. The way he praised her arguments in meetings, the way he leaned in to listen more closely, the low, complicit tone of his voice, all of this began to provoke an uneasy strangeness in Laura, something that she tried, at first, to interpret as kindness. But kindness doesn't send messages after work asking if she had a hard day. It doesn't ask her what she usually does when she's alone. It doesn't compliment her haircut as if it had any impact on the team's mood. And, most importantly, it doesn't invite her to a coffee just to relax at 7:30 at night, after work. Laura hesitated for 2 days before answering, but the yes came faster than she expected. Maybe because, at that moment, she needed someone to see her beyond the role of wife. She wanted to be just herself, without ties, without pressure, without a past. And when she found herself sitting at the table of the small cafe in the city center, with him in front of her, smiling as if she were in front of a rare prize, Laura was no longer sure if she was still being the right woman, or just a woman desperate to feel something again. She returned home that night with shaking hands. Nothing had happened except conversations, laughter, and a look that was too persistent. But inside her, something had already been broken. She slept late, restless, listening to the sound of the light rain beating on the porch. The next day, she avoided checking her cell phone in the morning. When she finally did, there was a message from him: "I dreamed about you." Maybe it's wrong to say this, but it was a good dream. Laura stared at those words as if they were a confession of something she herself didn't want to admit. She deleted the message, but not from her memory. And, at the end of the day, she replied, "Maybe dreams like that serve to remind us of what's missing." The following days were like a slow slide. The tension built up almost imperceptibly. The number of messages increased. The conversations went beyond the limits of the professional. The meetings became opportunities to be close, to smell his perfume, to hear his low voice saying things that Laura had never heard from Daniel again. And with each step, she tried to convince herself that she wasn't crossing any definitive line. Not yet. It wasn't cheating yet. But it wasn't fidelity anymore either. In the third week, he invited her to dinner. Laura declined. Then he texted her at 2 a.m., "Sorry I declined. I wish I could have gone." The response came almost instantly, as if he had been waiting awake. "I still want to have dinner with you. Not as colleagues. As two people who understood each other without having to explain anything." She didn't respond. But the next day, she wore a different lipstick to work. He noticed. And smiled. Daniel, on the other hand, was increasingly involved in his new role. The travel required a kind of energy that drained him, but he felt fulfilled. He knew he was building something important. He felt that he could finally offer Laura the stability she had always valued. He planned to invite her on a trip together at the end of the semester, to write her a letter like old times, maybe even renew their vows in a special place. He carried a photo of her in his wallet. An old photo from their first summer together. Sometimes he would look at her on the plane, while the other passengers slept. And he would smile. Friday arrived with a sultry atmosphere, and Laura spent much of the day trying to convince herself to cancel dinner. But she didn't. She chose a discreet outfit, nothing provocative. She told herself it was just another night out. When she got to the restaurant, he was already there. He was smiling like someone who had won something rare. They talked for hours. They laughed, drank wine, talked about fears, about youth, about everything that is not said in an office. When he took her hand across the table, Laura didn't pull away. And when he said, "I've been watching you since the first day, but I held back out of respect for your marriage," she just sighed. There was no more resistance. And when they left the restaurant, walking down the narrow sidewalk, the kiss happened as if it were inevitable. Long, calm, as if it had been promised for years. The next morning, Laura woke up early. She avoided the mirror. She washed her face vigorously. She spent hours staring at her cell phone screen without the courage to open Daniel's messages. When she finally read them, they were just trivial questions: what the weather was like, if everything had gone well at the meeting. She felt guilty. She felt ashamed. But she also felt a freedom she hadn't felt in years. It was a painful paradox. I knew I couldn't go on, but I didn't know how to stop. In the following days, she kept her distance. She stopped responding to his messages. She tried to reconnect with Daniel. She cooked, complimented his outfit, and suggested a walk in the park. He noticed the change and was happy. Laura, however, felt suffocated in her own attempt at redemption. The problem wasn't Daniel. The problem was the emptiness inside her, which not even his gestures could fill anymore. But the distance between her and the other didn't last long. All it took was a tense meeting, a new conversation outside of office hours, a chance encounter, for everything to come back. And this time, with more intensity. What started with a kiss turned into caresses, hidden touches, and finally, a meeting in a hotel. Laura hesitated until the last moment. When she got into the elevator, her breath was short. When the door opened, he was already waiting for her. And when they kissed, there was no longer any doubt that they had crossed the line of no return. That same night, Daniel came back early. The event had ended earlier than expected, and he had decided not to let her know. He wanted to surprise her. He bought Laura's favorite wine, picked up the ring she had complimented weeks before, and wrote her a letter. When he got home, she wasn't there. He sent her a message, and she replied with, "I decided to go out with a friend, I'll be back late." He accepted, although he felt something strange in the air. In the morning, she came back before he woke up. She said she needed to take a shower. He hugged her, and she froze for a second before hugging him back. She felt guilty. Daniel, only love. 2 days later, he traveled again. And on that second trip, the same scenario was repeated. Laura no longer felt so guilty. The other man's presence was more constant, more engaging. She felt desired, alive, looked at. Daniel, on the other side, was planning a new surprise. A weekend at a resort, just the two of them. He wanted to rekindle the flame, show that there was still room for new memories. He called the hotel and made the reservation. He bought flowers. He took the first available flight. He wanted to surprise her in a memorable way. At the hotel reception, he said he wanted to prepare something special and asked that no one announce his arrival. He went up to the room she had reserved. He knocked. No answer. He used the extra card, which the staff had provided. When he opened the door, the air conditioning blew a cold blast into his face. The muffled sound of the television came from the room in the background. He walked forward in silence. And there, for the first time, he felt his body truly tremble. The bedroom door was ajar. When he pushed it open, what he saw was not just a scene. It was the collapse of everything he had built over the years. Laura, naked, lying with another man. The same man he saw every day in the company hallways. The same man who shook his hand in meetings. The same man who had once complimented him on having an incredible wife. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't make a fuss. He just looked. And he understood. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. The worst choice. He still didn't know why. He still didn't understand what had brought Laura there. But in that moment, something inside him broke irreparably. Love, respect, trust, they all went up in smoke. And he didn't know that what would come next would be even more devastating. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He didn't go home, he didn't call anyone, he didn't destroy anything. He stayed still, in the car seat, with his hands still on the steering wheel, breathing as if he were trying to stop the world from falling apart. The image of her exposed skin, her face relaxed in sleep next to another body, still pulsed in his head as if it had been tattooed inside. But what hurt the most wasn't what he saw. It was what he felt. The absence of anger. The silence of love that no longer begged for explanations. Deep down, something inside him had already sensed it. Maybe in the absences, in the less attentive touches, in the words that came without a soul. But seeing was like signing the sentence. The next morning, he didn't confront her. He didn't make a fuss. He went home and acted as if he were returning from a normal trip. Laura tried to feign normality, her smile trembling, her eyes avoiding direct contact. Daniel watched her as if he were watching an old version of himself being ripped away, a memory being erased in real time. She asked if he was okay, and he responded with a nod. Laura didn't realize it right away, but the man who had returned from the airport was not the same man who had left days before. 2 days later, Daniel called her to talk. He said he needed to be honest. Laura shrank back into the chair, her hands clasped together in her lap. She knew. But she still tried to maintain her composure. Daniel looked at her with an expression that was too calm for what he was about to say. His voice was low, steady, as if he were reading a final document. I know. The hotel, the room, the other one. I saw it. Laura's body froze. She tried to say something, but the words died in her throat. Daniel didn't scream, didn't cry. He just kept going. You can justify yourself, you can try to explain, but I'm not here for that. I just want to tell you that it's over. Tomorrow you'll receive the divorce notice. And please, don't try to stop me. I'm not coming back. Her eyes widened, she held his hand as if she had suddenly woken up from a trance. Daniel, no, please, listen to me. I got lost, it was a mistake. I still love you. But he pulled away with a sharp movement. I don't want to hear you talk about love. Because love doesn't do that. Love does not lie in rented beds while the other dreams of reunions. Love does not look into the eyes and lie so lightly. Laura tried to fight. She searched, insisted, cried. She called in the middle of the night, sent messages begging for a chance, promises of change, sincere or fake regrets, it was hard to know. But Daniel remained firm. He went back to living alone. He silenced social media and immersed himself in work. Not out of coldness, but because he needed to survive the hole that betrayal had left. But it was one ordinary weekend, while searching for old documents in a box stored in the garage, that Daniel found something that would make all his pain seem like just the surface. A forgotten folder, one of those with crooked rubber bands and old papers, almost thrown together with the photo albums. He had never touched it. But his wife's name in large letters on the envelope caught his attention. When he opened it, he found what appeared to be an exchange of printed messages. Attachments. Notes. And finally, a contract. The words hit him like an electric current. Each line, each paragraph, was a different knife piercing his skin. The document detailed a personal negotiation. And among the emails, dated almost a year earlier, was the truth. Laura had been approached by a man, a longtime acquaintance of hers, with whom she had been in sporadic contact, and who had offered a significant sum of money to spend a night with her. The proposal, initially rejected, was slowly digested. The man knew exactly her weak point, her ego. Her fear of time. Her loneliness disguised as routine. And the contract was signed. The amount? An absurd sum, transferred to an account opened in a third party's name, but traceable. The dates matched the days she said she was with friends. They matched her cold absences. They matched the emotional collapse that followed. Laura hadn't betrayed him just out of desire, or confusion. She had sold herself. Out of vanity. Out of insecurity. Out of pleasure, perhaps. But, above all, for money. Daniel sat down on the cold floor of the garage, the papers shaking in his hands. His mind tried to deny it. He tried to find another explanation. But it all made sense now. The comings and goings, the controlled distancing, the strategic reappearances, the sudden gestures of affection that didn't seem spontaneous. The guilt wasn't for what he felt. It was for what he had agreed to do. Later that day, he went to the apartment where Laura was living. He didn't tell her. He knocked on the door with the papers in his hands. When she opened it, her hopeful smile instantly disappeared. He came in, threw the folder on the table and stood there in silence. She opened it, recognized the papers, and her entire body lost color. Daniel watched her as if waiting for the truth without needing confirmation. Laura tried to speak, but her voice was a whisper. I can explain. But he interrupted her. Don't lie. Just tell me since when. The answer came after a long silence. Her face looked like someone who had been caught in a crime that she herself hadn't believed she had committed. Almost a year, she said. I needed to feel something. I felt invisible. And when he proposed, I thought I would never have that chance again. It was just once. I swear. Just once. But after. I hated myself. Daniel took a deep breath. You didn't have to lie. You didn't have to say you loved me while you sold your presence. You didn't have to make me look like an idiot, make me dream about us again. You could have left. But you chose to stay, lying. She fell to her knees, crying. She said she regretted it, that she was willing to give it all back, that it didn't matter how much money she had, that she wanted to rebuild, that she had been weak. Daniel didn't answer. He walked to the door. Before leaving, he simply said, "It wasn't the betrayal that destroyed me. It was the price you put on yourself. It was making me believe that we were real, while you accepted being bought like something disposable." And he closed the door behind him. On the way back, he stopped the car at the edge of a lake. He stood there until the sun disappeared, looking at his own reflection in the water. The pain, now, was different. It was no longer anger, nor sadness. It was mourning. For someone who never existed in the way he believed. For a love that, perhaps, only he felt in its entirety. And for a part of himself that would never return. But that night, when he returned home, he met a woman in the elevator who had crossed his path before. Her gaze was calm, but curious. As if she recognized in that man the pain she herself had felt. It was a simple, "good night," exchanged. But for the first time, Daniel felt that there was something in the future that he did not yet know. Something that did not require lies. Something that cost nothing, except the truth. The next day dawned cold, with a sharp breeze blowing through the windows of the apartment where Daniel now lived alone. The bare walls still carried the echo of the life he had before. The pictures boxed in a corner of the room revealed his constant effort to move forward without getting lost in memories. After the confrontation with Laura, silence took over. She didn't look for him again, perhaps out of shame, perhaps because she knew there was nothing more she could say. But even so, the story wasn't over yet. The past, even when cut off, still pulses in small open veins. At work, Daniel maintained his posture. His eyes were steady, his voice controlled, his efficiency intact. No comment was made, not even when his boss, the same one who had shared that clandestine bed with Laura, greeted him with the same coldness as always. He didn't need to seek revenge. The downfall that was coming wouldn't be caused by him. It would be the work of the destructive nature of those who build their lives on lies. And that downfall was coming. He knew it. He could feel it in the air. Something was about to collapse. The following week, an internal restructuring of the company was announced. Changes in the executive board, job reshuffling, replacement of leaders. Daniel's boss, visibly uncomfortable, avoided his presence as if physical contact with him could materialize the guilt that until then had been well buried. But there was more. Confidential documents began to circulate. An independent audit had been initiated, and rumors began to spread. Daniel had no involvement, but he was not surprised either. People like that man always think they can control everything, but they always leave traces. And someone had decided to follow those traces. Meanwhile, Laura struggled to stay on her feet. The money she had received from the negotiation she had once accepted now weighed like lead. She tried to use part of the money to finance personal projects, courses, change careers, fill the void. But every step she took alone reminded her of the absence of something essential, respect. Those around her no longer saw her in the same light. Friendships grew cold. Looks changed. And even her lover, once so secure and eager, had become an indifferent shadow. The man she had risked everything with now treated her like a convenient mistake. She tried to rebuild bridges. She tried to reinvent herself. But it was too late. The mark was there. Not as punishment, but as a consequence. One night, she decided to write a letter. Not to apologize, or to ask for forgiveness. But to try, somehow, to recover the voice she had lost within herself. She wrote calmly, word for word, describing not what he had done, but why he had allowed it to be done. She spoke of fear. Of the constant feeling of not being enough. Of the silent terror of becoming invisible within her own life. And she confessed that money was not the driving force, but the symbol. That amount represented the value that she, in her fragmented mind, thought she still had. She ended the letter by saying that she did not expect a response. That she just wanted him to know that, for the first time, she understood what she had lost. And what I would never get back. Daniel read the letter days later, on a gray Tuesday morning. He didn't cry. But he felt. He felt not for her, but for the depth of human emptiness. For the way someone can destroy themselves inside without the world around them noticing. And although he knew that it didn't change anything, he recognized that Laura, at least in that gesture, had been honest. For the first time, without hiding, without manipulating. She simply exposed what was left. And what was left was almost nothing. Life went on. Daniel was promoted shortly after. His boss was fired for financial irregularities, discoveries that came to light without his direct interference, but were the result of years of hidden arrogance. His downfall was swift, and no one tried to stop him. When they learned of his betrayal, his involvement with Laura, the looks inside the company turned to silent judgment. He, who had previously thought himself untouchable, became an old piece on a new board. Laura, in turn, watched the world slowly drift away. Like someone who talks too much in a crowded room and realizes that everyone else has already left. You tried to reposition yourself. You tried to find purpose. But nothing fit. It was in this setting that Daniel, on an ordinary autumn afternoon, met the woman from the elevator again. Her name was Helena. A doctor, divorced, with a teenage daughter and a history marked by silent losses. She had a calm strength, a look that didn't ask, just observed. They started with quick conversations, casual encounters in the building, then coffees, walks. Helena didn't ask too many questions, and perhaps that's why Daniel felt comfortable. For the first time, he could exist without having to prove anything, without having to carry the weight of an unresolved past. She wasn't a patch. She was a new page. Months passed. And one day, Laura saw him on the street with Helena. They were laughing, walking hand in hand, with the ease of someone who is starting over without rushing. Laura stopped on the other side of the sidewalk, motionless. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just watched. For the first time, there was no anger, no desire to get back. Only the painful awareness that that man, who had once been hers, was now someone else. And that what she had lost, would never come back. Later that night, Laura sent one last message. It simply said, "I hope you're happy. I know I don't deserve to say this, but seeing you well, made me realize how small I was." Daniel read it. And, for the first time, he replied, "I'm fine. And I hope that one day, you will be too." There was no irony, no revenge. Just a dignified final point. Because sometimes, the greatest act of strength is letting go without wishing the other person to suffer. Time passed. Pain became scars. And the scars, memories. Daniel and Helena continued together, without rushing, without ghosts. Laura, in turn, continued too. But alone. In silence. With the awareness that some mistakes cannot be fixed. Not out of malice. But because they were committed at the exact moment when someone chose to erase everything that was true in the name of an illusion. And so, the story ended. Not with explosions. But with the surgical precision of a truth that, when it arrives, undoes everything that was built on fear. The truth that loving someone is no guarantee that they will be loved back. But stopping loving yourself in order to keep someone, is always the beginning of the end. From the moment Daniel replied to that last message, something in his chest closed definitively, like a door locked from the inside, with no intention of being opened again. The relief he felt was not exactly due to forgiveness, but to closure. There were no more loose ends, no more doubts, and no more room for delayed justifications. The pain that had once emptied him no longer controlled his thoughts, and in place of suffering, a kind of suspicious peace emerged, like someone who learns to walk slowly after having spent too much time running towards an abyss. The feeling was not of victory, but of deserving it. The cycle had closed, not because everyone was fine, but because everything had been said, faced, lived to the point of exhaustion. And now, it was up to him to live what would come next, no longer carrying a past that did not belong to him. Helena was aware of this process without intruding. She had a subtle emotional intelligence, the rare type of sensitivity of someone who understands that healing cannot be forced, but only accompanied. Their conversations gained depth effortlessly, and little by little, Daniel began to tell fragments of his story, not as a confession, but as a testimony of someone who survived. Helena did not ask for details, but listened attentively to everything, and when she said something, she did so precisely. You did not need to have been betrayed to be transformed. It was enough to have trusted someone too much who did not know the value of it. This phrase, said during a walk in a park, echoed strongly within him. It was not about blaming Laura or reliving the betrayal. It was about understanding that, sometimes, the other person's mistake forces us to look at our own lives more honestly. He realized that, for a long time, he had also forgotten himself. Not because he loved too much, but because he loved alone. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Laura was going through a process that could not be considered a new beginning, but rather a confrontation. Confrontation with the silence of her own company, with the emptiness of the reputation she herself had destroyed, with the closed doors that had once opened easily because of her smile. She tried to rebuild her image in the market, but the atmosphere was small and the rumors were bigger than any resume. Offers were rare, contacts were becoming distant, and the support network that had once made her feel safe dissipated like dust in a forgotten room. The friends who had once surrounded her with advice now preferred silence. Not out of cruelty, but out of discomfort. No one wanted to be the mirror of such irreversible choices. The days began to weigh heavily. Her routine consisted of hurried coffees, failed attempts at interviews, and long afternoons where the clock seemed to mock her immobility. The solitude that she had previously said she needed now consumed her in cold waves, and regret took on a more physical form, like a constant presence in the living room at night, lying on the couch with her eyes lost in the darkness. It was no longer longing for Daniel. It was shame of herself. Of having allowed such a superficial part of her vanity to destroy something so profound. Of having put a price on something that should not be negotiated. Of having confused freedom with selfishness. During this period, she tried to seek refuge in therapy. The psychologist, patiently and firmly, guided her through memories that Laura preferred to keep buried. It was a slow, often painful process. But she persisted. Not out of hope of returning to who she was, but out of a need to discover if there was still something redeemable in her. Progress came in small doses. One day, she was able to look in the mirror without looking away. Another day, she called her mother after months of no contact. These were small gestures, but they were real. With each session, she faced a more complex dilemma: how can she move forward when she was the main author of her own downfall? On Daniel's side, his relationship with Helena became more natural. They began to share more than just coffee and walks. She introduced him to her daughter, who received him with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. She was a reserved teenager, but over time, Daniel gained her trust with simple gestures, honest advice and constant presence, without demanding a place, without trying to replace anyone. He didn't want to be a father, stepfather, or hero. He just wanted to be there. And this desire to be there, without demands, was what most impressed Helena. She said that Daniel was like a tree in the middle of a storm, firm, but not rigid. Ready to bend, but never to fall. Daniel's most pressing moral dilemma arose when he found a post on social media shared by a mutual acquaintance. It was Laura, talking about starting over, about forgiveness, about choices. The text was careful, without any direct references, but those who knew the story knew what was behind it. The post went viral, with many people praising her courage, while others criticized her opportunism. Daniel stood there, reading the comments, trying to understand whether this was a legitimate attempt at reconstruction or just a new mask. But, contrary to what he imagined, he didn't feel angry. He felt compassion. Not for her. But for someone who still needed to prove herself all the time to feel like she was worth something. This realization was decisive. He understood that he no longer needed to protect himself from pain. It no longer had power. Laura was now just a distant memory, part of a closed chapter. What defined him at that moment was what he did with the present. And the present was full of possibilities. His relationship with Helena was taking root. Living with her daughter brought lightness and responsibility at the same time. Work was thriving, but without consuming his life. There was balance. And, for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to be happy without fear. But life, as always, is made up of unexpected encounters. On a rainy afternoon, when he entered a coffee shop to shelter from the storm, Daniel came face to face with Laura. She was sitting alone, reading. When she saw him, her eyes widened, but she didn't get up. She just nodded, in a restrained gesture. Daniel, with the same calm that had accompanied him since then, approached her. Not to confront her, but out of respect. They exchanged a few words. "How are you?" "Better." "And you?" "At peace." The silence that followed was full of meaning. Laura seemed smaller, more fragile, but also more human. Her eyes carried something that Daniel couldn't define, whether it was gratitude or regret. Maybe both. Before leaving, she simply said, "Thank you for responding to that message. You have no idea how much that saved me." Daniel just smiled sideways, waved and left. Outside, the rain was still falling. But he didn't run. He walked in peace. He didn't look back. Because there was nothing there to hold him back anymore. The past had done its job, it taught him everything he needed to never lose himself again. And now, the story was ready to find its true ending. An ending that didn't need spectacle. Just truth. The morning after the brief, silent encounter with Laura at the coffee shop, Daniel woke up feeling lighter than he had imagined he could feel after everything. It was as if that last crossing of paths had brought not only the definitive end of a cycle, but also a subtle confirmation that his absence made more sense in her life than any attempt to return. There was, in that exchanged look, a wordless truth that finally freed them both from the weight that still lingered between memories and unresolved pasts. For the first time, he fully understood what it meant not only to forgive someone, but to let that person go their own way without carrying the scars as proof of pain. There was no need to prove anything to anyone. True justice had been served not by the other person's downfall, but by their own ability to move forward without wanting revenge, and that was, deep down, the purest type of revenge one could offer, genuine happiness. That same week, Helena invited him on a weekend trip. A getaway in a country house lent by a friend, surrounded by dense vegetation and a serene lake. Her daughter, Sophia, was also going, which made Daniel hesitate for a moment. He still felt cautious about getting involved in deeper bonds, but he accepted. They arrived on a Friday night, the sky clear, their bags set aside to enjoy the warmth of the lit fireplace and the smell of simple food being cooked calmly. Helena lay on the sofa with a book in her hands, Sophia listened to music in the bedroom, and Daniel, watching that scene, felt like he belonged to a place that no longer needed to be conquered. It was different from what he had lived with Laura, not better, not worse, just different, quieter, more stable. He no longer needed to scream inside himself to be heard. And this absence of noise was, now, the clearest sign of true love. During a walk around the lake on Saturday afternoon, Helena commented on how much she admired the way he was dealing with everything. She knew enough to understand the depth of what had happened, but she never used that as an anchor. She said she observed his silences as someone who understands that some pains do not go away, they just change. Daniel, touched, confessed something he had never said before. He said he was not angry with Laura. That all he wanted for her now was peace. Helena looked at him intensely, without responding immediately. Then, in a calm voice, she said that only a man who had known true pain would be able to wish something like that on someone who had destroyed him. It was this kind of maturity that she saw in him and that made her believe that there was still hope in love. Later, sitting on the deck of the house, their bare feet touching the cold wood, Daniel and Sophia had their first deep conversation. The girl told her about her parents' divorce, about the insecurities she felt when she saw her mother start a new relationship, about her fear of being forgotten. Daniel listened with the same attention he used to have in the most decisive meetings of his career, and when he spoke, he did so with the honesty of someone who understands that trust is built on details. He said he didn't intend to take up anyone's space, but that if she let him, he could be there. Not as a substitute, but as someone rooting for her. Sophia smiled at the corner of her mouth and said she liked how he didn't try to be something he wasn't. And in that simplicity, an invisible bridge was formed. Meanwhile, Laura was going through an increasingly intense internal process. She began to dedicate herself to social projects, initially at the recommendation of her therapist, and later because she really got involved. She helped women in situations of emotional vulnerability, listened to stories of abuse and reconstruction, and realized, over time, that the guilt she carried was a common burden for many. She began to write about it. Short texts, anonymous accounts, reflections on self-esteem, vanity, emotional fragility. Little by little, she felt that there was something still redeemable within her. Not to erase what she had done, but to give it new meaning. She began to understand that it was not possible to erase her own choices, but it was possible to rebuild something more dignified from them. Sometimes, at night, she still cried. Not for Daniel, but for herself, for everything she stopped being when she chose to be someone he would not recognize. One day, during a talk for women going through a separation, she was asked to share part of her story. She spoke sincerely, without embellishments. She said that she had cheated, yes, but that before that she had cheated on herself. That the worst form of abandonment is the one we practice against our own values. The silence in the room was absolute. Some women cried. Others applauded her. Laura was not looking for applause. But at that moment, she felt that, for the first time in a long time, she was standing up on her own feet. While Laura was discovering her new mission, Daniel was living his new life. His work was thriving without swallowing him up. His nights with Helena and Sophia were filled with sincere conversations, board games, and series watched without rushing. He didn't have to constantly prove that he was good, nor be afraid of not being enough. Helena loved him for who he was now, not for who she imagined he could be. This was new and liberating. On one of those nights, she told him that she admired his ability to rebuild himself without hardening himself. And he replied that perhaps that was exactly the secret, allowing yourself to break. Only those who break completely are able to rebuild themselves with truth. Those who live half-heartedly just glue the pieces back together. That same week, Daniel received an unexpected invitation. A mutual friend from old times, who now organized literary events, wanted him to write an article about men overcoming emotional problems. He laughed at the idea at first, but then, motivated by Helena, he decided to give it a try. The text came quickly, directly, as if it had been kept inside him all along. It talked about losses, about silences, about how men learn to hide their pain to appear strong. And how this kills them inside. When he finished writing, he read it to Helena, who cried silently. She said that this was a text that everyone needed to hear. Daniel was no longer just someone who had survived betrayal. He was someone who had transformed pain into a bridge. And so, as the world turned, the two continued on their new paths. There were no grand endings, no spectacular twists and turns. There were silent reconstructions, daily maturations, new bonds formed based on truth. The story that began with a betrayal was now turning into something much greater, proof that even the deepest pains can become seeds of rebirth when faced with dignity. And when he looked back, Daniel no longer saw a wound, but a firm scar. A mark that did not define him, but that reminded him every day of what he would never allow again, to forget who he really was. It was late afternoon when Daniel and Helena returned from the bookstore, their hands intertwined, smiling at something that only they knew. Their routine had adjusted so naturally that they didn't even seem like two survivors of such dense past stories. Inside the car, soft music played, and Sophia, now closer, slept in the back seat. There was a peace there that couldn't be bought, couldn't be forced, it only appeared when life finally surrendered to the truth. Helena rested her head on Daniel's shoulder and whispered that, for the first time, she felt that her home wasn't a place, but someone. He kissed her on the forehead, without needing to say anything. That was it. That was how things were supposed to be. No hiding places, no games, no silent contracts of pain. Only love that remains after the chaos. In the following months, their lives took a new direction. Daniel began to be invited more frequently to talk about emotional health, he wrote regularly, and he became a reference in something that, ironically, was born out of destruction. But he never romanticized his pain. He made it clear that there was no glory in suffering, that overcoming was not a trophy, it was a necessity. And that no one needs to be strong all the time. People need to be true, even when that means falling, breaking, and starting over. Helena accompanied him from afar, but with pride. She was his foundation, his balance, and together they formed a home that did not need frames to be real. Meanwhile, Laura continued her silent process. She no longer wrote on social media or gave public lectures. After a while, she understood that there was a difference between exposing oneself and understanding oneself. And that, often, exposing oneself came more from the need to be forgiven than from having actually learned. She decided to step away from the spotlight and live with more humility. She began giving support classes to women seeking to re-enter the job market, without saying who she was or what she had done. She simply listened, helped, and, between the lines, tried to give back to the world some of the dignity that she herself had let slip away. She lived alone and didn't have relationships with anyone, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew she wasn't ready yet. Going through a love like the one she had with Daniel and destroying it the way he did required a different time of mourning. It was like walking barefoot on glass, each step taught more than it hurt. One morning, when she opened her mailbox, she found an envelope with no return address. It was a copy of the book that Daniel had recently published. The dedication was just one sentence: "May the truth transform us, always." There was no signature. But she knew. She read each page as if she were seeing herself for the first time in a mirror that does not lie. When she finished, she cried like she had not cried in a long time. Because it was not a cry for him. It was for her. For the woman she had stopped being. For the life she had given up in exchange for an illusion. For the choice that could never be undone. Daniel's former boss, on the other hand, was sinking into an opposite scenario. After the financial scandal and his silent dismissal from the company, he tried to get back into the market, but doors closed one after another. His name was tarnished, the rumors were confirmed, and his previously intact reputation now became a burden. He tried to deny his mistakes, tried to silence those who spoke, but the truth spreads like perfume. No one needs to see it, they just need to feel it. His wife left him shortly after, friends drifted away, and he became just a name crossed out in old diaries. He now lives in a smaller city, far from his old circles, reclusive and forgotten. Not out of revenge, but as a consequence. He also tried to write his version of the story, but words do not cleanse what was done with calculation and coldness. And loneliness, in the end, became his only mirror. Daniel, on the other hand, when he looked back, did so with gratitude, not because it was good, but because it taught him more about himself than any professional success or praise. He understood that there are pains that do not kill, only reveal. That there are betrayals that, instead of destroying, awaken. And that the true value of someone is not in what they say about them, but in who they choose to be when no one else is looking. It was this value that guided him to Helena, to Sophia, to the new home, to the days that, now, had more light than shadow. It was not a happy ending. It was a new, conscious beginning. One night, during a quiet dinner at home, Sophia asked him if there was anything he would change from the past. Daniel thought for a few seconds, took a bite of the baked apple he had made, and said no. Because if he had changed anything, he might not have gotten this far. And everything he had now was worth more than everything he had ever lost. Sophia smiled, Helena looked at him with teary eyes, and in that moment, Daniel understood that even the most tortuous paths can lead to peace. You just have to keep walking. Now that this story has come to an end, tell me, what did you think of it? Which part impacted you the most? Do you believe that forgiveness is always necessary or that sometimes moving on is the only answer? Write in the comments, I really want to hear your opinion. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage now and subscribe. Here you will find real, intense stories full of lessons, like the one you just heard. Always remember, betrayal doesn't just destroy marriages, it tears apart trust, kills dreams, erases the essence of true love and breaks invisible structures that take years to build. No fleeting emotion is worth the price of a lifetime with someone who chose you with their heart. This channel does not support, encourage or justify any type of betrayal. We are here to show, with stories like this, that every choice has a consequence, and that, in the end, true love never survives where the truth is not respected.